Okay, so Jack Catterall versus Harlem Eubank had a wild ending. It was a ending after a clash of heads. After 7 rounds into the fight, both guys were cut. Jack Catterall seemed to get the worst of the cut and was pouring blood everywhere, but it was ultimately Harlem Eubank corner doctor that decided to stop on Harlem Eubank was enough to stop the fight. Now, overall, the fight was pretty boring so far. If you saw my tweets on it on X, you'd sort of see my thoughts on the fight. And I'm going to stick to what I was saying there, because in the heat of the moment, I thought this, and even reflecting on the fight further, it did feel like George Groves versus Chris Eubank Jr., where you've got, in this case, Jack Catterall, but in that fight, George Groves, who's markedly the better boxer out of the two. Jack Catterall was, disciplined and stuck to his jab and continued to be awkward and was hard for Harlem Eubank to pin down and throw shots. The same way, the things that I was saying that Harlem Eubank needed to do to win, which would be find Jack Catterall, put him against the ropes, unload shots on him, he wasn't able to do. So kudos to Jack Catterall, because he implemented his game plan perfectly. Or what I imagine was his game plan. He implemented it perfectly. He was disciplined and he was dedicated to the game plan. He never wavered from it. He didn't get lured into scrappy brawls. Not to say that maybe couldn't have happened later on into the fight, but he seemed very focused in this fight. And that additional weight that he had did seem to make a difference, because he felt, in my opinion, a lot more switched on in this fight than he did against Arnold Barboza Jr. That being said, Arnold Barboza Jr. is quite a good boxer in his own right. Of course, he's a formerly unbeaten, world caliber boxer. And Harlem Eubank had never really fought anyone on the level of Jack Catterall before, and we sort of saw it in this fight where Harlem Eubank, similar to Chris Eubank Jr. when he fought George Groves, he was hoping for one big punch that would stop Jack Catterall, rock Jack Catterall, or ultimately a big shot that could bring Harlem Eubank back into the fight. And he was searching for that shot. He wasn't really setting up his big shots very well. That being said, he was setting them up a bit better than, a Eubank Jr. would have been back then. Harlem Eubank was feinting a lot. He was moving about a lot, but he wasn't throwing enough, right? If you're just feinting and moving and not throwing anything, it kind of becomes redundant, right? Because what are you doing? You're just moving about for the sake of it, which is sort of something the commentators picked up on. And comes round 5 and 6 and 7, it looked like he was getting a bit more tired, because he had just been jumping around and moving and walking about and not really doing anything. And compared to Jack Catterall, who's been consistently landing his jab, applying pressure, moving about, occasionally putting punches together, but wasn't really putting punches together. To be honest, he didn't really need to. The jab alone was enough to keep Harlem Eubank off of him, and he was winning the rounds. Now, some people will say it was a boring Jack Catterall fight, and to some extent it was, because Jack Catterall, he was just staying on the outside, using his southpaw advantage, feinting, landing his jabs, not at will, but landing his jabs consistently throughout the fight. And it wasn't really a brawl. I think Harlem Eubank probably was getting frustrated at times and was leaping in too much with big shots and would sort of force a clinch, and then a couple of times they both got wrestled to the ground. And ultimately, that lunging in is what caused the end of the fight as well. Both guys lunging in, clash of heads, both guys were cut, gnarly cuts. They were gnarly cuts, and the fight had to be stopped in the 7th round. Now, Jack Catterall, in my opinion, probably won every round. I think some of the judges were giving it 69, 66 or whatever. I can't remember the exact scorecards, but I struggle to give Harlem Eubank any round. Even in the rounds where I think the 4th or 5th round, Harlem Eubank was a bit better than he was in the previous rounds, he still didn't win those rounds, in my opinion. Because just because you go from landing no punches to a couple punches, that's an improvement, but that's still not enough to win a round, right? And Harlem Eubank did sort of get found out, in my opinion, because Jack Catterall was outboxing him, and it didn't take a lot for Jack Catterall to outbox him as well. A few feints and a tricky but consistent southpaw jab was all it really took to undo Harlem Eubank. So no doubt, I think Harlem Eubank will probably have to go back to the drawing board. this was, the biggest fight of his career, the best opponents he's had so far. But that's not to say that Harlem Eubank can't be rebuilt, because he has still got a tricky style, and you will face boxers at a decent level who aren't as tricky, who aren't as disciplined, aren't as dedicated to their game plan as a Jack Catterall, where there are some fighters that quite easily could have been drawn into a brawl, and quite easily could have been caught with some of the shots that Harlem Eubank was throwing, but ultimately Jack Catterall was too good of a boxer to do that on. I think Eddie Hearn wants to try and get a world title fight for Jack Catterall. I don't think that's a great idea. At welterweight, I think all the welterweight champions probably beat him. I've not got them in front of me, but that'll probably be a video for another time. But I don't think any of those guys... I don't think Jack Catterall's got it in him to beat any of those guys at this point. Honestly, the same for Harlem Eubank as well. Because if that's the way that Harlem Eubank is going to be fighting against world level opponents, he's not winning a world title either, right? But of course, Harlem Eubank is a lot younger in his career, had been through less wars, and can go back and sort of rebuild. But we'll see what's next for both guys. But it was a interesting fight. I hear the criticism that it was just another boring Jack Catterall fight. It kind of was, but it'd be interesting to see what's next for both guys. So yeah, another episode of the Seth Solo Side Quest in the bag, and I'm out. Peace.